This is Briar McKenzie, a dietitian and visiting research fellow at the New Zealand Brain Institute here in Christchurch. So Briar's work focuses on how diet influences brain health, both in reducing disease risk and supporting quality of life for people living with neurological conditions. Briar has recently returned from Sydney, where she's based at the George Institute for Global Health, and there her work focuses on diet and cardiovascular disease and food policy across Pacific Island countries. So we're very, very fortunate to have Briar with us today. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming Briar.
Okay, I'll just check. Can you all hear me okay? No? I'll be louder. Is that better? No? Better now? Okay. Perhaps give me a wave if I get too quiet during the presentation and I aim to project a bit more if that works. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to be here and talking with you all about diet and brain health. As a bit of an introduction, although thank you for the lovely introduction yourself, I am doing research around diet in terms of risk reduction for neurological conditions, but also around quality of life, working with data here in New Zealand, specifically around Parkinson's disease risk. I also do work based across the Pacific region, more around food policy interventions to support cardiovascular disease. But it's great to be here talking more generally about diet and brain health, and that will be more of the focus today, so quite a general discussion about diet, healthy eating, and how to support health and well-being. I'll also talk a little bit about the evidence or research around diet and Parkinson's disease, and touch on diet and MS as well. So to get started, why nutrition matters in neurological disease. So there are multiple sort of important aspects around diet and brain health. So diet is well known to impact cardiovascular risk factors, so things like hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, and living with overweight or obesity. And these are known to influence neurological outcomes and overall brain health as well. Nutrition affects the whole body, so it affects the gastrointestinal system, immune function, and like I said, vascular systems, which are all relevant in Parkinson's and MS care. And there's also supportive and preventative care options. So nutritional guidance focuses on more symptom management and symptom prevention, say, rather than cure, and it has a focus on enhancing quality of life as well. So touching more on what the evidence does or does not support, and I'll be diving into this more over the course of the presentation. So there's the importance of overall healthy dietary patterns, and I'll go into what I mean by healthy in a minute, because I know healthy can be a bit of a loaded word. But overall dietary patterns show consistent benefits for general health, despite some sort of uncertainty and evidence around specific disease effects. So there's some risks identified in the research around more restrictive diets. So a restrictive diet might be where you sort of cut out a specific food group completely, say trying to cut out carbohydrates, as this can increase sort of nutritional risk and also can be quite difficult to sort of follow on a day-to-day aspect and sort of keep going in the long run. So there's a need to really balance the evidence in terms of what the evidence shows, but also what's good guidance for everyday life. So it's around sort of empowering with realistic, flexible advice, balancing that evidence with practicality and personal preference and importance. So food is obviously really important outside of health and well-being as well. It's a form of connecting with others, enjoyment, and you don't really want to lose those aspects that come along with food too. So in terms of what I mean by a healthy diet, I think these two images here are quite helpful. They're both New Zealand-based references, so from the Heart Foundation and also the Ministry of Health guidelines as well. And what I hope to show at least is that variety is key. So there's a whole range of different foods pictures here. They focus on eating most of vegetables and fruit. And this can be, fresh fruits and vegetables, but also canned or frozen fruits and vegetables, getting that variety across different seasons as well. Then there's a focus on grainy foods and starchy foods, so your whole grains, your whole grain cereals, your breads where you can see those grains in them, and starchy vegetables like kumara and potato. You're then sort of focusing on proteins, so legumes, fish and seafood, and for red meat, more of that lean red meat, so where there's less visible fat on that. In terms of dairy products, you've got a small component of that, and then healthy oils, nuts and seeds as well. So it's eating this wide variety across these different groups contribute to a healthy dietary pattern, and we'll focus on water as well for fluids. So what is some of the research around brain healthy dietary patterns? So you may be familiar with the Mediterranean style diet or the MIND style diet. So both of these are different dietary patterns that have been researched quite a lot. The Mediterranean diet was researched a lot initially in cardiovascular disease. It was sort of identified because they found that certain populations in the Mediterranean had a lower risk of heart disease than others in other regions of the world. And they really started to delve into what that looked like and the reasons behind it. And that was contributed to sort of lifestyle in terms of food, and also style of living as well. The Mediterranean diet has then really been researched across a range of different diseases too. And there's been sort of building evidence in the cognition space in terms of supporting cognition and risk reduction in terms of dementia specifically as well. I'll go into what the Mediterranean style diet looks like specifically in a moment. They'll also touch on the MIND diet. So the MIND diet, you can consider it a bit of a spin-off, so to speak, of the Mediterranean diet. And it was developed specifically around brain health. But what they both have in common is that they really focus on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and fish, like the very big photo there, while limiting sort of processed foods. So they have known health benefits, they link to better heart health, like I mentioned, perhaps reduced dementia risk, and improved metabolic profiles across populations. So in the case of the Mediterranean diet, it's been studied in populations outside the Mediterranean, and been shown to be supportive of health there as well. There's more and more research going into these dietary patterns in terms of Parkinson's disease and MS as well, and potentially their applicability and risk reduction and quality of life support for these conditions too. So what the Mediterranean diet looks like itself. So like I mentioned, it's traditional of the area, but it's really a plant-forward eating pattern, and they're sort of thought of as an overall pattern rather than a rigid diet, so to speak. So there's flexibility within that. But like I said, it's built around vegetables, fruits, legumes, beans, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and probably quite famously for the plentiful use of olive oil. So adding olive oil to salads or cooking with olive oil, but really using olive oil as a main form of that. It really promotes fish and seafood, and less on sort of the dairy products or the eggs, and then even less so in terms of red meat. So again, water is a focus here, and I think perhaps the Mediterranean diet gained a bit of media attention around somewhat promoting red wine consumption. That was one of the traditional versions. It's sort of less considered these days when looking at the Mediterranean diet and disease risk. But what it encourages is, or recommends, is that people don't start drinking red wine. It's more a very moderate part of a pattern. and there's obviously lots of separate research into separate harms around alcohol consumption as well. So like I said, it's also linked to other lifestyle behaviour patterns, so like physical activity, socialisation, so sharing meals with people, and perhaps also like a less stressful environment too. So there's a whole sort of range of factors within that Mediterranean pattern. So the mind diet is very similar to that, but it has a much stronger focus on a couple of key things within that pattern. So it really focuses on green leafy vegetables and also on berries. So that's all linked to separate research that has looked at these foods specifically around their antioxidant profiles too. And it has quite strong limits around butter intake, cheese, fried food, pastries and red meat as well. But what I hope to show through going through both of those dietary patterns is that in lots of ways they look quite similar to those overall healthy dietary patterns or guidelines from New Zealand that I showed at the start of this presentation. So thinking about how diet might influence the brain. So there are a few keys of biological pathways linking food and brain health. So one of these pathways is through inflammation and oxidative stress. So diets rich in plants and antioxidants, they lower inflammation linked to neurodegeneration and immune conditions. So that's one pathway that's being explored. The other pathway is a gut-brain axis. So diet and what you eat, that influence your gut microbiome and sort of what sort of bacteria is in your gut. That influences gastrointestinal health and neurological function as well through that connection between your gut and your brain. And it's been explored more and more so in Parkinson's disease. And then the third and final pathway is around vascular and physical health. So good vascular health supports brain resilience, nutrition supports muscle and energy for cognitive protection as well. So people tend to look at all of these pathways either together or in isolation, but it seems like food can act on any one of these. So a bit more of an evidence overview. So when we look at research or to support certain statements around nutrition, you tend to look at the strength of the research. And something that has strong evidence support is something that has been tested in multiple populations, perhaps by an intervention trial. So you go in and you say give a diet to a group of people, record how that impacts, but also collated all that evidence. So across multiple studies, you're bringing all that evidence together and you're seeing whether they all agree with a similar pattern or support a similar message. So that's sort of the strongest case when you have multiple forms of evidence supporting one clearer message. This can be quite tricky to get in dietary research. There's lots of factors that influence what and how people eat. It's also quite hard to look at in terms of diet and neurological conditions as well, because there can often be quite a long lead time between, say, measuring diet and then looking at neurological outcomes as well. So that's sort of the evidence caveat, but there's relatively strong evidence around those dietary patterns, that overall dietary patterns and a sort of healthful diet or reduced cardiovascular risk, and healthy aging for neurological disease. That Mediterranean diet specifically that I talked to, there's quite a lot of emerging evidence around the Mediterranean style diet, and it may benefit symptoms in Parkinson's disease and MS as well, but like I said, this is a developing evidence base. And then when the evidence gets a bit conflicting, can be around supplements and detoxes. So claims around sort of individual supplement use on their own, in isolation of a broader dietary pattern, or in isolation of considering what people eat more holistically, and detoxes in terms of cutting out specific things, at the moment tend to lack sort of that robust overarching support. And there can be concerns that they sort of divert or take focus away from supporting a broader healthy diet. So So I was going to touch on a bit of the specific evidence around Parkinson's disease. So a higher adherence or alignment, I guess, to a Mediterranean diet has been linked to lower Parkinson's disease risk in some studies, especially in the early stages, but this is a developing field. In terms of symptom support, diet supports improvements in non-motor symptoms such as constipation, weight maintenance, and perhaps also cognition in diagnosed cases. And then in terms of evidence around sort of modification of disease, there's limited research at the moment around diet sort of being a therapy, so to speak, or modifying Parkinson's progression. So a key consideration around Parkinson's is the interaction with medication and protein, which you may be familiar with. So the food medication interaction around levodopa and protein is that dietary protein can compete with levodopa transport, and this can reduce medication effectiveness. So it can influence how that medication is taken up in your body, especially when it's taken close to protein-rich meals. So this is sort of an individual assessment type approach, but for people who do experience this, there can be different strategies recommended by your doctor around either timing, so taking levodopa at a time, say 30 to 60 minutes before a meal, or focusing meals on more protein or high protein intake later in the day can improve that sort of medication response. But balanced nutrition is still important, so protein intake is still really important in Parkinson's disease to sort of maintain muscle mass and strength and weight maintenance as well. It's just around the timing of the medication there. So the actual recommendations around protein intake don't differ from the general population. Then thinking about nutritional risk in Parkinson's disease. So unintended weight loss and swallowing difficulties are sort of key risk factors. And the red flag around unintentional weight loss, perhaps the easiest way sometimes to recognise this is when clothes start feeling a bit looser than they previously were when you put them on. But other red flags are around, say, coughing during meals or eating taking a long time, chest infections and fatigue. So that's where nutrition care and support, say through a dietitian and specific support there, can really come in and focusing on, safety around food and adequate energy intake and hydration. So I'm just going to touch briefly on multiple sclerosis and evidence around diet there. This has been less of a focus in my research, so hopefully I still touch on the key points. So recommendations around diet and MS, again, focus on overall diet patterns and diet quality, and there not really being one sort of key diet for MS, so to speak. There's a lot of research happening in the diet and MS space, and perhaps some promising dietary patterns, again, around foods that are rich in fibre, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and fish. So again, it's sounding quite similar to those dietary patterns that we talked about at the start of the presentation. And also perhaps omega-3, depending on how much fish intake you have. But yeah, there's no single sort of proven diet with MS as well, but supporting healthy eating to support more general health and cardiovascular health too is important. And thinking more about vitamin D in MS, so I looked at this more, this has been quite an interesting and I think developing area in diet and MS research. There was a recent meta-analysis, so that's a very big study that pulled in lots of findings across as many studies as possible, or all the published research around diet and vitamin D and MS, and it found no significant benefit of high dose vitamin D supplementation on disability or relapse for people with established MS over a 6 to 24 month period. There has then been some identification of some early benefits. So a recent trial that was published in France found a reduced disease activity and improved MRI outcomes when vitamin D was given in the early stages. But really this sort of starts to reflect that the evidence is still a little bit conflicting, and it might depend on stage and also more generally what people are eating and sun exposure as well, which is also very important for vitamin D. So I'll touch more on about dietary sort of support for overarching symptoms. So one of this is around constipation and gastrointestinal health. So constipation is obviously something that can really impact life, but it can also be addressed to some extent, at least through diet. So it also affects comfort, appetite, medication absorption, and overall quality of life. But there are multiple dietary strategies for bowel health. So focusing on fibre, hydration, and physical activity can support regular bowel movements and healthy gut bacteria as well. So there's practical advice around increasing fibre gradually, maintaining hydration. So fibre and hydration go hand in hand, otherwise focusing just on fibre can make the issues worse. And yeah, definitely avoid the vital bowel fluids. So what might that look like? So focusing on whole grain foods, so that's things like whole grains, whole grain bread, so the breads where you can actually see the seeds or the grains in it, rolled oats, brown rice or wholemeal pasta, and using sort of different grains. So mixing up, say, rice with, say, quinoa or something like that. Fruits and vegetables are a great source of fibre, and especially when you can leave skins on. So that skin just adds more fibre. So you think about your apple or your carrot, eating the skins of those is really helpful. And then again, drinking enough fluids. So the recommendations are around 8 cups a day. This doesn't have to be straight water. It can come from other fluids that you have, things like milk and hot drinks. Soup, which at the moment is probably quite a good one. These all count as fluids. So what this might look like, say if you were fibre boosting your breakfast, you could think about wheat bix with, say, stewed apples that you've stewed with the skins on, porridge at the moment, with frozen fruit that you've added to the top and gets heated up in the porridge. Sort of making those little changes or additions to add more fibre to different meals can really help. And touching on nutrition support, so when to seek individualised nutrition care. So we touched on some of those red flags earlier, I think Parkinson's disease, that it's key to sort of seek individualised nutrition support through doctors and dietitians when there's unintentional weight loss, swallowing issues, constipation or dehydration, and fatigue. So these can all be supported through nutrition. There's obviously benefits to early identification and a high value in personalised care. So you can talk generally about nutrition, but everyone's different and what's healthy for different people can look different as well. So it's really about tailoring what and how you eat to you, which can be really supportive. So I've got some take-home messages from this part of the talk, and then I'll touch a little bit on the research that's being done in Canterbury. So there's some practical dietary actions to sort of focus on a variety of foods and sort of plant or whole food meals with adequate protein, fibre and fluids while limiting ultra-processed food intake. So I like to think of this when you sort of go into a supermarket, is that you're focusing on those foods sort of around the outside of the supermarket, the fresh fruits and vegetables, or frozen vegetables and fruits, lean sources of meat and poultry, dairy products, you're sort of on the outside of the supermarket. And then those sort of more processed foods, they're sort of down the aisles, and not all of those are bad, they're all part of a diet, but just thinking about balancing or focusing on all those whole foods can be key. What also is super important is consistency over perfection. So small sustainable changes done regularly can provide meaningful health benefits over time. And thinking about nutrition more holistically, so complementing medical treatment, physical activity, and social support for overall well-being. And like I said at the start, food is so much more than just getting what nutrients you need. It's about enjoyment and eating things you love as well, so that's also really important. So I thought I'd just quickly touch on some of the other research that's being done here in Christchurch. Many of you might be familiar with the New Zealand Brain Research Institute. I've been based there for the last 6 months or so, but they're an independent brain research institute who are working very hard to find answers to complex questions surrounding conditions affecting the brain. So they work in collaboration with Canterbury Uni, Otago Uni, and also the District Health Board here. Their sort of main research focus is around Parkinson's disease, so they've got a few studies, one really long longitudinal one that's been going for 18 years, assessing the progression of Parkinson's disease with a focus on non-motor symptoms and imaging as well. They're also doing a nationwide cohort investigating genetic and environmental determinants of Parkinson's. So I've been working with that data because they've collected food intake information during that. And then they're also tracking the number of people with Parkinson's disease using available health data sets as well. It's really sort of important information to have in New Zealand. Their other work focuses on dementia prevention research clinics and clinical trials, and they also focus on Huntington's disease as well. And just to sort of finish, I thought I'd touch on what I actually do from a research perspective. So I'm looking more at sort of population level interventions to support risk reduction for dementia. From the work I've done with the New Zealand Brain Research Institute, we've looked at diet quality of people living with Parkinson's disease. So this has involved looking at data from over 1,000 people, so 500 people living with Parkinson's and 500 also control participants as well. And we've looked at those dietary patterns that I talked about today, so the Mediterranean diet and that mind diet as well. And what we've found initially is that people with Parkinson's disease have a much better diet in terms of the mind diet, so they're then more in line with that sort of health promoting dietary pattern, which I think is an interesting finding. But more generally, diet quality across the whole group of participants has been sort of quite low. So we're trying to sort of understand barriers and facilitators to healthy eating across the sort of age group in New Zealand and what strategies there might be to support eating as well. So that's the presentation, and I hope to allow plenty of time for questions. We did get some questions in beforehand, so I thought I'll just answer a couple of them here that I'm not sure that I completely covered during the presentation, and then open up for more general questions if that works. So one of the questions was, how can I lose weight when I'm not very mobile? So this question, and I've brought in a slide for this, but basically I think if you're being advised by a health professional to sort of lose some weight, you still want to focus on eating a variety of foods. So still eating from those food groups there, but perhaps portion size might become more important. So quite a useful way to think about portion size, it's not, say, looking at a plate, is thinking about your hands. So your hands are in proportion to your body and in proportion to what you need as well. So vegetables, sort of being enough vegetables is like a cup. Enough starchy food, so like potato or rice is like your fist. Fish would be your whole hand, and chicken or red meat is a palm. So for me, I feel quite unlucky. I've got quite small hands. Doesn't translate into much, but it can be a good way to think about food relatively, and snacks, having a hand of snacks. But you still want to focus on that variety of food and ideally not sort of cut out key foods for that weight loss as well, because each of those food groups creates really important sort of components of a healthy diet. The other question was around protein and salt and Parkinson's. So hopefully I've addressed the protein question. That protein is still very important. The recommendations for protein intake remain the same as the general population, but it can just be a timing thing if you're on certain medication. In terms of salt and Parkinson's, that tends to relate to whether you've got low blood pressure as well. So you might receive specific advice around blood pressure and salt. If low blood pressure isn't an issue, then the recommendations around salt intake remain the same as the general population, which is 5 grams a day or less. So that's a teaspoon of salt or less. In New Zealand, most of us get our salt through packaged foods or processed foods. So foods that may not necessarily taste salty, like bread, some cereals can contain quite a bit of salt. So it's, and we tend to get less salt from adding salt to food or meals. But that's sort of around the salt guidance, as it more relates to sort of specific symptoms or perhaps other things going on, and probably is quite an individualised question for that for the GP or doctor. I think those are all the specific questions, but open to more.
Thank you. We did have a few more come through. One was how would people put on weight in a healthy way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think putting on weight in a healthy way, again, you're focusing on variety. So thinking about getting the most from all of those groups still. Perhaps focus on snacks. So making the most of snacks, and those snacks can be a bit more what we call energy dense. So you might focus, say, on peanut butter on crackers or something like that. So nuts can be quite energy dense and quite easy to snack on. So a handful of nuts. Looking to sort of add things to meals. So at breakfast time, adding yogurt if you have cereal, adding fruit, adding multiple things to your breakfast to sort of boost that. Just sort of considering all these groups and how you could add components to meals already, and making the most of snacking between meals to boost energy intake and energy more generally as well.
And a follow-on from that was, is there a place for the nutritional shakes in weight gain?
Yeah, I think yes, and perhaps yes and no. Perhaps if you're being specifically advised to have these shakes, like it is, the name just popped down my head, but if you're being specifically prescribed them, yes, and absolutely do what doctors suggest. You can sort of really make boost smoothies yourself if these aren't so palatable. So thinking about a smoothie with like banana, berries, peanut butter, yogurt, full fat milk, and adding even milk powder. So milk powder sort of really boosts things as well. That would give you quite a boost. And a lot of the more like over-the-counter, not prescribed shakes are based quite heavily on milk powder. So that's sort of something you can utilise yourself at home if the DIY approach is the way you want to go.
Thank you. Another one was strategies for maintaining energy through nutrition.
Yeah, and again, I think regular meals and snacking could help this. I think if you're sort of struggling to get through a meal or a day, perhaps an afternoon boost helps. So an afternoon snack then. Focusing, I think, on key fruits as well. But yeah, just sort of really, I'd say spreading food throughout the day quite evenly, and making most when you can of sort of those sort of more energy dense things like nuts and seeds can give you a bit of an energy boost as well, or whatever might take your fancy. So things like, you know, those smoothies I talked about, just sort of getting more in can boost energy.
Thank you. We'll go to the room first before. Yeah, we'll come round.
Thank you. I've got two parts to my question. What are the influences of environment on diet, and what are the social implications for certain diets?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you. I think environment plays a key role on what and how people eat. I think you think about the food environment we live in at the moment, it's very easy or more accessible to say eat foods that may not be that conducive to health. There's an expense associated with eating healthily at the moment, which I think is really unfortunate and shouldn't be the case. I think everyone should be able to access a healthy diet. And yeah, I think that environment has changed, and that's where some of my other research around food policy can be quite interesting, because what you're relying on there is government level change to influence the environments we live in and make it easier for everyone to eat a healthy diet. But that would require probably influencing food industry and perhaps also supermarkets. Yeah.
Just a supplementary question.
Yeah.
What influences do spraying of crops have, and how can we overcome if it's got bad features?
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's sort of quite a bit of evidence around, say, pesticide use in spraying on crops, particularly in Parkinson's disease. I think it's a really interesting one, and it's something we've been thinking about a bit, because you talk about green leafy vegetables or boosting that, and they're probably the crops that are targeted by some of this use. So there's obviously, you know, washing vegetables and everything, but I actually think a lot more needs to go into the nuance of how some of these foods that you might be suggesting might be exposed to certain chemicals. But again, I think that's a policy and a broader question around what can and can't be used on food supplies. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Yeah, I'll come back here.
You talked about key fruits.
Mm-hmm.
What are key fruits?
Yeah, sure. So eating a variety of fruit is key. Key fruits from, say, the MIND diet that they looked at were berries. The MIND diet was established in Finland, and I think berries are perhaps more of a component of dietary intake over there. And I really looked at because of the antioxidant content. But really, fruits more generally provide a whole range of different nutrients, and eating sort of the rainbow, so to speak, is really important. So I probably shouldn't have said key fruits, but key fruits in terms of the MIND diet were berries, but more generally it's around eating the variety of fruits. Yeah.
And in terms of quantity of fruit one eats, if one is sort of heavier than one should be?
Quantity of fruit. I think it's still. I'm just thinking of fruit. I think fruit intake is still key. Like, if you think about variety of foods you eat, fruits aren't that energy dense. I mean, they do contain sugar, but they contain a lot of other key benefits like fibre and other nutrients. So I think within those guidelines, like 5+ a day, fruit is still supportive of health. Perhaps if it's much outside of that, you still won't be focusing on that 5+ a day recommendation. But yeah, I think I wouldn't normally recommend cutting back on fruit intake because fruits are so good for you. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. Question here.
Thank you. I have a question, but just the first comment.
Yes.
I think we all get trapped a little bit with supermarkets providing the same vegetables and fruits the whole year round, so trying to focus on local and seasonals, really important. I mean, you might end up eating a lot of greens in winter, but yeah, so it's hard because capsicums are $6 a day, they're $6 each the other day. My question's around alcohol, and as a fairly newly alcohol-free person, I probably feel a bit holier than many people, but can you talk about alcohol and general health, but also brain health?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I really agree with your question about variety of fruits and vegetables and sort of what's available. I do think that's when using frozen and canned varieties can be really helpful if you're looking for variety out of season. Not well, some can be local, but yeah. But yeah, it is hard. Yes, and then in terms of alcohol, yeah, the evidence on alcohol is interesting. And in previous studies that have looked, say, at populations and tracked what people have eaten and drunk, and then looked at health outcomes, some studies did find that alcohol was somewhat protective. But what they think happens in those studies is reverse causation. So people get sick, they might stop drinking, and so that puts them in the, say, not drinking group. So that sways the results that they've seen in the studies, if that makes sense. Okay, so basically it takes people who continue to live, say, without a disease, they might continue to drink alcohol, and people who get diagnosed with a disease, they might stop drinking alcohol. So when you compare people who drink alcohol compared to those who don't, in terms of whether people have disease or not, it can make it look like alcohol is protective because more people without disease are still drinking alcohol. Is that correct? So that's some of the thoughts around some of the evidence space around alcohol and disease risk. And over the past while, the evidence really shows that alcohol is sort of harmful in that way, harmful for health more generally. And it's recognised by the World Health Organization as something that's particularly harmful in terms of cancer risk. In terms of brain health, yeah, like I said, in the Mediterranean diet, it's sometimes considered in terms of red wine intake and sometimes not. In the research that I do, we don't look at alcohol, we don't include it as part of the healthy diet. We sort of try to control for it in that analysis with the thinking that given the other how the evidence is changing, alcohol is not health promoting in that space. But yeah, it's a growing and tricky field, but yeah, certainly more and more people moving into the non-alcohol space.
Thank you. There was a question here, and then we'll come over here.
So I just wondered whether you would speak about the research into the effect of sugar on brain health.
Sugar specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, that's something I've not looked at too much in isolation on its own. I think my understanding of the research is that the harms of sugar really depend on the foods that they're coming from. So we talked about fruits and things like that. You're getting so many other benefits from fruit intake.
I was meaning sugar rather than glucose and fruits.
Oh, like added sugar? Yeah, certainly added sugar, which are you saying comes from sort of like processed foods or just outside?
Yeah. Just your sugar for that's in ice creams and biscuits and cakes and the effect of sugar on brain health.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what I know from sugar in those dietary patterns, they're classified by high intakes of those foods, like ice creams, biscuits, sort of those high sugar foods. There's sort of more of that detrimental risk there in terms of developing poor health outcomes.
Yes.
I haven't drilled into sugar in isolation.
Of brain health, that's what I was.
Yeah. So super interesting, but I haven't drilled into that directly. But I will.
Yes, it's part of the Mediterranean diets in some parts of Europe that red wine in particular is beneficial. Is that true or false?
Yeah, look, it has been explored as part of the Mediterranean diet for a long time, but the consensus now is that wine in terms of alcohol consumption is not that conducive to health. So more and more we're looking at a Mediterranean diet without considering wine. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a question here.
I was just wondering, you were just discussing that your research is around some of the barriers, and I was just, can you tell us a little bit more about what's the barriers you're looking at? It was mentioned a little bit about sort of that whole community, policy, national, but I was just interested in what you were doing and the barriers that you're looking at.
Yeah, thank you so much. So some of the barriers we're considering are around food security, so the access to enough and affordable healthy food. So a food secure diet would be a diet where there's easy and plentiful access to everything shown here. But trying to sort of look at that specifically for people living with Parkinson's disease, which hasn't been done in New Zealand, but we know that food insecurity more generally is a problem. But yeah, the hope is to also do some sort of research where we have interviews with people and really understand what might be influencing diet and what support might be needed as well. So that's the hope.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room? Yeah, over here.
Yeah, just going back to the protein with Parkinson's medication, I just want to know if you have your medication an hour before breakfast, can you have eggs for breakfast?
Yeah, I think the general guide is around 30 to 60 minutes before eating, around protein meals, but I'd say that's definitely perhaps a question directly for the doctor just to advise, because people have different limits around what works best for them. But yeah, this is the timing.
Yeah.
Can you comment on infusions? Have you looked at them as part of the dietary studies or considered them as a separate area of health and wellbeing for Parkinson's patients?
Is that like nutrient infusions? Yeah. We haven't been able to look at that directly. Unfortunately, that sort of information is not collected in the data that I'm working with. So no, I haven't been able to look at that, sorry. That's interesting.
You mentioned salt a little while ago. Is there a connection between salt and Parkinson's, more salt, less salt? And the other thing is, what about low blood pressure? Is that part of Parkinson's? Is it caused by Parkinson's? Is it caused by the drugs?
Thank you. I'll touch on the first part first around salt. The current thinking around salt intake and the link to Parkinson's would be through cardiovascular risk factors. So higher salt intake increases blood pressure, and hypertension, high blood pressure might be a risk factor for Parkinson's, or as part of that sort of cardiovascular profile that can be a risk for Parkinson's disease. So around that side, the focus is still on lower salt or eating below the recommendations. In terms of blood pressure and that relationship with Parkinson's disease, I'm not convinced which one is playing a part in that. Of low blood pressure, there might be still multiple factors that would stand out, whether that's medication, Parkinson's symptoms. But yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer that part directly. But certainly if you've got low blood pressure, there might be specific advice from your doctor around salt intake that might differ from the general recommendations. Yeah, thanks.
Tina.
The for the
the Mediterranean diet, it is mainly fish and vegetables, right, and fruit. Fish is very expensive in New Zealand, which is ridiculous because we're surrounded by a sea. However, are there other alternatives to fish, or if you're eating fish, what is the recommended intake during the course of a week?
Yeah, sure. You're right, fish is super expensive here, which seems odd when we're an island. Again, there's some of those snap frozen fish options which can be a bit cheaper. I think the general guidelines around sort of a couple of serves of fish a week. So following more of a Mediterranean style, you would probably be looking at like 3 serves a week. Within the New Zealand guidelines, ideally like 1 serve a week. But those sort of other alternatives around, say, snap frozen fish or some canned fish, canned tuna can be part of that diet as well. Otherwise, it's around focusing on those other protein sources, so lean proteins. So whether that be chicken and poultry or, your legumes, so like adding chickpeas or say lentils to meals to sort of focus more on different sources of protein and more limiting that red meat. But yeah, it can be challenging on the seafood side of things.
They say that vitamin B12 is a useful thing for fatigue and MS. What's your viewpoints? And the second part of the question, you said that the thinking of high-dose vitamin D is not so useful in established MS. When did that change and why am I still on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're being sort of given individualised advice and support around supplements, that's one thing, but normally supplement use is key sort of in deficiency. So when you're not sort of getting enough from the diet, that's when supplements can be useful. I think the space around vitamin D is a changing space. So that meta-analysis that I commented on that was published in 2024, so relatively recently in the research world. In terms of B12, that hasn't sort of been a focus looking specifically at B12, and I haven't really delved into MS in my own research, so I'm not quite sure there, but yeah, I think with their supplements, they might be supported, individually for a reason, and that's fine, but sort of general advice is a diet more generally and healthy eating more generally should hopefully support what is needed.
Thank you. Any more questions in the room?
Sorry, I've just got one
Yeah.
more. I recall coming to a lecture here once before, and it was all to do with the bad biomes that are in the gut of the people with Parkinson's as opposed to the general public. But I never got to the bottom of, presumably this diet would be good for bad biomes, but I'm not really quite sure what they are and why they're occurring.
Yeah, the gut microbiome is kind of a magical space and quite a confusing space. A lot of talk about different bacteria and sort of things that might help or hinder the gut microbiome. Ideally, eating a variety of foods supports the gut and should support the bacteria living there and the different types of bacteria living there. I don't have a clear sort of gut healthy say diet or why that's specifically the case in Parkinson's from that presentation, but certainly variety again is key. I feel like I probably sound like a broken record, but just getting that range of fruits and vegetables and other foods and fibre, like roughage in the gut, is really good to sort of keep the gut healthy. But yeah, it's definitely a sort of evolving research space, and people spend a lot of time looking very specifically at the gut microbiome. So yeah.
ways can you go as far as informing parents of the children who may need supplementary foods?
Yeah, sure. Supplementary in what way? Is it okay to clarify?
That they have maybe insufficient greens, so you possibly could look at giving information to those parents to assist them in getting a balance in the intake of foods.
Yeah, I think supporting children to eat healthily is another key area where I think there could be broader environment support. I think there's been sort of, school food programs and school lunches that could be an avenue that could support healthy eating in children. But certainly I think supporting healthy eating across the population and reducing those barriers, like we talked about healthy eating and, those policies that change the environment. So healthy eating is the easiest option, would support parents to provide healthy food for their kids and also kids to eat enough healthy food as well. But I think information alone without wider support can be really tricky to enact. Yeah.
A supplementary question.
Yeah.
What place does fast foods have in what you think is a good balanced diet?
I think food needs to be for enjoyment as well. And I think food holds different importance in different ways to people. I think of fast food is a particularly important part of what you eat, and it's meaningful in a way for a celebration, and that's what you do, say as a family or whatever, then that's that. But I don't necessarily think that fast foods should be as easy, cheap and accessible as they currently are, and perhaps displacing other foods in the diet as much as they currently do either. So yeah, I think there's that sort of component there where every now and again probably fine, but if you're relying on those foods, it's a more challenging story.
I was just going to ask one question. I was just, instead of our day-to-day here at Braintree, one of the things that comes up quite a lot, I've just been thinking about, what are the barriers? Like, how do we, and that's your research, how do we break down the barriers? And people just being really, really fatigued and tired is something that we hear. And it might be that you have a person that has Parkinson's or MS, but actually their care partner is often really tired as well.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you could just talk to that a little bit from a really practical point of view, how to help.
Yeah, that's a very important point and really interesting. Thanks for raising. I think that is a real challenge, and I think supporting healthy foods in that context is tricky. There have been sort of different, say, interventions done for different population groups around actually providing healthy meals to specific groups and people and families, or providing sort of healthy food boxes. Certainly in Australia that's being done for people with diabetes and also people with stroke, with some really quite interesting findings. I know that there's Meals on Wheels here too, which in a way is an avenue for that too. But I think it's focusing perhaps on quick, easy, fixed meals that rely on sort of what's in the cupboard and keeping things simple. So just focusing on having, say, that protein source, whether it's a frozen bit of fish that's been cooked, and some rice and some veggies, just sort of bringing something quick and easy together that can sort of stay in the fridge or freezer. You bring it out and cook, and there's less time involved, or having nutritious snacks to hand, basically. So having those sort of bags of nuts, or little, say, frozen bags. When we're talking about smoothies, if you've got old bananas, freeze those, and then you've got something ready to put in a smoothie. just sort of little hacks like that that make it a bit more simple.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheese doesn't seem to be part of the Mediterranean diet, so should cheese be restricted with Parkinson's?
Yeah, I think cheese fits within the broader sort of dairy recommendations. So cheese is a part of that sort of dairy group, which is, yeah. So while it might be lesser part of the Mediterranean diet, I think thinking about more healthy dietary patterns more generally, cheese is still part of that. And if that's a way to get dairy and also some protein, that's fine. There's no sort of specific restrictions around cheese intake. Yeah.
One of the first brochures I got about Parkinson's advised substituting cream for low-fat milk and butter for olive oil, which didn't please my cardiologist. Would that be aimed at the concern about this unexpected weight loss that keeps cropping up? And also, what causes that? How is that related to Parkinson's?
Yeah, that's a great question. My immediate thought would be yes, that's targeted at the concern about unexpected weight loss. Definitely substituting that olive oil butter substitution. You don't normally see recommended in that way. So yeah, I think unintentional weight loss would have been the target there. I think from Parkinson's and causes of unintentional weight loss, there's some links sometimes of people have tremors, using more energy, and that can be linked to unintentional weight loss. Also finding it more difficult to eat, or some of that fatigue, like not cooking meals, things like that, that can sort of gradually contribute to that unintentional weight loss. So that is at the place where, those strategies to help with weight gain, where you sort of add, full fat milk or cream and stuff to porridge to really enrich meals if there is a lot of weight loss there. But I think everyone's symptoms are different, and different cases are needed at different times. So.
I have a question. You touched on the gut-brain axis, and I know the gut microbiome is probably one aspect of that, but are you able to elaborate more on that? We get lots of questions about that and what that is, and for both MS and Parkinson's and general brain health, why it's important.
Yeah, I think my understanding, like I said, I still see it as this sort of magical research space where there's still so much happening, and I really feel like they're getting to the bottom of what's going on there. My understanding as a dietitian is really about sort of enriching the gut, or making sure that gut is as healthy as possible through a variety of foods, and sort of, sounds a bit gross, but feeding the good bacteria through the foods you eat, and supporting that, and that it's all connected up through to your brain, and perhaps also linked in with some of those inflammation pathways as well. So I sort of presented the three sort of aspects of diet and brain health, like inflammation, vascular health, and the gut-brain axis, and in lots of ways perhaps all three of these interact more generally. I think growing space, and that's my sort of take on that.
And added to that, we get asked about fermented foods, kombucha. There seems to be quite a trend there at the minute. Is there, what's the evidence around that, and how does it support brain health?
Yeah, so certainly like those probiotics or fermented foods can help with the bacteria in the gut. So I think like sauerkraut, things like that are other examples. Kefir, that's sort of really fermented sort of yogurts as well. They can also help with your gut health too. In terms of direct evidence, like looking specifically at those fermented foods with brain health, I don't know of it, and I'll check when I get home, but I'll have to double check. I'm not quite sure if there's any evidence supporting a direct link there.
Okay, any more questions in the room? No? Okay. Thank you very, very much. I was saying to Briar that we had a dietitian workshop, so this is really complementary to that in terms of knowing what's happening in the research space and also having your voices in the room. And I'm sure you go away with lots of ideas when these questions are raised as well, and where the gaps are in terms of research. So yeah, thank you very much everybody for coming, and thank you for your contributions also and your questions. There'll be more talks like this with a Ask Me About section and a presentation. So please do keep an eye out on our newsletter. But please join me in thanking Briar for her time today.